بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. A brother has asked me in one of the comments, he said, as Muslims of Ahl-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, we believe that the Quran can be changed. A professor, he talks about this professor who authored a book about corrections in early Quran manuscripts, and the brother is saying that some Muslims might be confused or it might bring doubts into them, so which might lead them to leave Islam. So the brother asked me to refute this book and clarify this issue. So inshallah, I'm making this video as a response to this brother's request. The first point I'd like to address is this brother's concern, and I want to commend him for caring about his fellow Muslims and about the Ummah and about establishing and clarifying the truth. The second point I want to mention is about people leaving Islam. It might seem sometimes like this is something new. It might seem like it's something urgent. It's something that that needs to be addressed right away because it's something that is just coming out, just happening now. But in reality, there has been some people who have left Islam throughout history, including during the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. We have, just to share an example, when the Prophet ﷺ was taken on the journey of Isra and Mi'raj, when he went from Mecca to Masjid al-Aqsa all in one night and back, the next morning people started talking about that. And this authentic narration says, فَارْتَدَّ نَاسٌ مِمَّنْ كَانُوا آمَنُوا بِهِ وَصَدَّقُوهُ. Some people who had believed in the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and they had followed him and believed in him, meaning they were Muslims, they had accepted Islam. When that happened, when the journey of Isra and Mi'raj happened, that brought some doubt into some of the Muslims, some of the people who had believed in the Prophet ﷺ, so they left Islam. فَارْتَدَّ نَاسٌ. They left Islam. And some people took that, some of them took, so those who disbelieved, took that and went to the Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and they said, can you believe it? Your companion, meaning Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is claiming that he went in one night from Mecca to Masjid al-Aqsa and back on one night before morning time. So all that happened last night. So Abu Bakr said, he said that? They said yes. They're trying to put doubt in Abu Bakr's faith and conviction. So Abu Bakr said, if he said that, then I believe him. They said, you believe him that he went on one night to Bayt al-Maqdis and came back before morning time? As we know, during that time, traveling from Mecca to Bayt al-Maqdis, to Jerusalem, takes a lot longer than one night. To go there and back in one night was unheard of. And so Abu Bakr responded, he said, yes, I believe him in that. He said, yes, I believe him in what is bigger than that, what is more than that. I believe him with the news from the heavens, meaning the revelation that he is receiving from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I believe him in that. And the fact that he's a prophet, he receives revelation. So this isn't anything compared to that. Why wouldn't I believe him? If he said that he's truthful, he's a prophet of Allah, he receives revelation, Allah can do miracles, why wouldn't he believe him? And that is why Abu Bakr was called As-Siddiq, because he believed the Prophet he said, when they went to try to put doubt in his faith, he said, if he said that, I believe him. Now the point of this is that some people didn't have as firm iman and conviction as Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. So when that journey of Isra and Mi'raj happened, it put some doubt in their minds, and they left Islam because of that. So it happened during the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, أَحْسِبَ النَّاسُ أَن يُتْرَكُوا أَن يَقُولُوا آمَنَّا وَهُمْ لَا يُفْتَنُونَ. Do people think that they will be left to say, we believe and they will not be tested? Allah is saying that He's going to test us, just like He tested those who came before us to know who is truthful in their claim that they believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and who is lying. So we will be tested. People who say they believe, be ready to be tested. And not everyone will pass the test. Some people will fail the test. Some people will leave Islam. Their faith won't stand that test. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in another verse in the Quran, وَإِن تَتَوَلَّوْا, يستبدل قوما غيركم. If you turn away, if you leave the deen or turn away from, or just turn away from Allah, from the deen, Allah will replace you with a different group of people who will not be like you. ثم لا يكونوا أمثالكم. They will not be like you. And Allah says in another verse, يا أيها الذين آمنوا, O you who believe, whoever turns away or leaves amongst you their deen, فسوف يأتي الله. Allah will come بقوم يحبهم ويحبونه. With a group of people, Allah will bring about a group of people whom He loves and they will love Him. In other words, Allah has no need for us. Those who can't withstand the test, and they say we believe and they're tested and they're not firm upon that, and they decide to leave Islam, they decide to turn away from their faith, then Allah has no need for them, and Allah will replace them, will bring about different people who will not be like them, whom Allah will love and they will love. And we know even after the Prophet Muhammad, when he passed away, when the Prophet passed away and Abu Bakr anhu became the Khalifa, some people turned away from Islam as well. They left Islam. So again, there's different tests throughout history, from the time of Prophet Muhammad until today, and it will be until the Day of Judgment, when you have some people who will leave Islam. They won't, when they're tested, they won't withstand that test. So people leaving Islam is nothing new, even if it might seem like something new or urgent, but in reality it's nothing new. It's nothing that just happened now. And alhamdulillah, Islam does not need anyone. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not need anyone. Islam has been growing from one person, from the Prophet ﷺ, when he started receiving revelation, calling people to Islam, until today, with over 1.8 billion followers throughout the world. There's the fact of the matter is that people who believe and do good is for their own benefit, and people who turn away from Allah and from guidance and they do bad, then they only harm themselves, and Allah does not need us. Allah does not need us. Now, the next point I'd like to discuss is addressing doubts. Addressing doubts or misconceptions, things like that, matters that aren't clear, is important. Or someone brings about something that they're presenting as a problem or trying to attack Islam. It's important to address these issues. Now, how do we address these issues? It's important to address them with knowledge based on the Quran and the authentic Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad. As we know, people's iman could be attacked or weakened from usually one of two things, or two categories, so to speak. One is shubuhat, doubts in matters of the faith. And the other one is shahawat, is desires, people following their desires. That's why they don't follow the deen, because they're following their desires, their love for wealth, their love for their own desires, for their love for the dunya, for worldly matters. Now, when it comes to the shubuhat, the doubts that people might bring up, it's important to know that sound knowledge based on the Quran and authentic Sunnah is what's needed. As Imam Malik rahimahullah says, لا يصلح آخر هذه الأمة إلا بما صلح به أولها. Nothing will rectify the later part of this ummah except what the first part of the ummah was rectified with. What was the first part of the ummah, the companions of the Prophet Muhammad? What was their affairs rectified with? What is it that made them upright, and who made them who they were? It was the Quran and the authentic Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad. Prophet ﷺ taught them the Quran and the Sunnah. And so Imam Malik rahimahullah is saying that the latter part of the ummah, if we want to rectify our affairs, we need to use the same approach. We need to use the same things that rectified the first part of the ummah, which is the Quran and the authentic Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's important to address these doubts without spreading them, without giving them more emphasis than they deserve, more seriousness, not to dwell on them so people might think, they have some legitimacy, because in reality you'll notice that all these doubts that are brought up, all these people trying to poke holes in things, subhanAllah, Islam is perfect, the teachings of Islam is perfect, and Allah has perfected this deen for us, and it's really a matter of us learning the deen so that those doubts won't impact us. So we should focus on teaching people sound knowledge, that way these doubts won't even impact them. they won't even get to them. But if someone doesn't know, then these doubts, even if they're not true, even if they're false, these claims might get to them and impact their iman. And it's important for us to remember that we don't guide people. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides people. Allah guides. We only clarify and direct people to the right way, to the truth, but it is Allah who guides. And lastly, it's important to point out that we do not change the teachings of the deen to suit someone, or just because some people might be leaving Islam, or it's problematic for them, or their iman is weakening, so we don't change the teachings of the deen. It's a trap of shaitan, trying to get people to change the teachings of the deen just in order to preserve the iman of the Muslims, or some people's iman that's weak, or they're leaving Islam or whatever. If it's problematic, then the problem is with them and their lack of knowledge. It's not with the deen or the teachings of Islam, because Islam is perfect. So it's important not to fall into that and attempt to try and clarify these doubts. Use sound knowledge from the Quran and the authentic Sunnah, and don't fall into making that serious mistake of trying to change the teachings of the deen just so that people won't leave it. That's not the right approach at all. Now let's move on to the next point and talk about what the Quran is, and what we believe about the Quran and how it was preserved. So the Quran is the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It has the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Quran is the actual speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as revealed to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it was revealed to him over the span of 23 years. As we know, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam became a prophet, started receiving revelation from Allah at the age of 40. He passed away at the age of 63. So over the span of 23 years, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam received revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, received the Quran. And the Prophet ﷺ received that revelation and taught it to his companions, radiallahu anhum, orally, verbally. Right? The Prophet ﷺ was illiterate. And most of the people at that time were illiterate. So some parts of it were written down, but few people who knew how to write wrote some parts of the Quran down. But the Quran the Prophet ﷺ received it and taught it orally, verbally, to his companions. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, هُوَ الَّذِي بَعَثَ فِي الْأُمِّيِّينَ رَسُولًا مِّنْهُمْ. It is He, Allah, who sent amongst the illiterate people a messenger from amongst them. The Prophet ﷺ was illiterate. Most of the Arab during that day were illiterate. During that time, they didn't know how to read and write. Rather, they were, everything they knowledge they had, they memorized. They knew by heart, and they were oral. They were very eloquent with their oral tradition. Also, Allah saying from them, a messenger from them, from the illiterate, ummiyin. Allah described them as al-ummiyin, the illiterate. A messenger from them, reciting to them or upon them His verses, and purifying them and teaching them al-kitab wal-hikmah, the book, referring to the Quran, and al-hikmah, the wisdom, which the scholars of tafsir have said it refers to the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. وَإِن كَانُوا مِن قَبْلُ لَفِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ. And before that, describing their condition, the Arab before guidance, before Islam, they were in a state of misguidance, clear misguidance. And so the companions of the Prophet ﷺ used to learn the Quran from him and memorize it. So you used to memorize it and have it memorized by heart. And a few of them used to write some verses or surahs on the skins of animals, or the stone, or whatever writing material that they had back at the time, the limited resources and equipment that they had for writing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran, إِنَّا نَحْنُ نَزَّلْنَا الذِّكْرَ وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. Indeed, we sent down the dhikr, the Quran, the remembrance, this revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and indeed we will preserve it. So that is how the Quran was. Allah preserved the Quran over the years. From the time it was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he taught it to his companions, they memorized it, they taught it to the following generation that came after it, the tabi'een, the generation that came after the companions radiallahu anhum. They learned it from the companions orally again, and they passed it down to the generation after them, from generation to generation. They learned it, every generation learned it, and from the generation came before them and passed it on to the generation that came after them. They taught it to them, and that is how it was passed down. And that is how we have the Quran preserved till today. And today we have thousands of people, if not millions of Muslims, who have the Quran memorized. people, kids as young as 5 years old, young men and women, old men and women, people who have learned and memorized the Quran by heart. And that's a very key point to remember of how the Quran was revealed, how it was taught to the companion, how it was passed down. And it was learned from person to person through so many people in each generation learning the Quran and passing it down, teaching it to the following generations. Now let's talk about the manuscripts of the Quran and when was the Quran first written down. So the Quran was first written down during the time of Prophet Muhammad, as we mentioned, by a few of the companions. Some of the companions, some scholars said there's 10, some said 20, some said as much as 40. The point is, out of when the Prophet passed away, there was over 100,000 Muslims at the time. So out of so many, you can see that only relatively few wrote down, knew how to read and write, and wrote down some parts of the Quran, different verses on animal skins and things of that nature, as we said. And so the Quran was, parts of it was written down by few people, relatively few people, during the time of Prophet Muhammad. The Quran was compiled later on during the Khilafah of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. That's when it was compiled together. And later on, after that, written copies were made from that, and it was sent throughout different regions. So that is when written copies of the Quran even became available. Before that point, the Quran was learned and taught, and even after that point, the Quran was still learned and taught, and even until today, the Quran is still learned and taught, mainly verbally and through orally. People learning it from a teacher, rather not from a book, not from a physical book. And that is how the Quran was always learned and passed down orally through memorization. And even until today, and it's mutawatir, even until today, meaning so many people in each generation memorized it and passed it down. It's not just one or two people, we're talking about so numerous people to that point when that's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is preserved. Allah says in the Quran, بَلْ هُوَ آيَاتٌ بَيِّنَاتٌ, but rather it, meaning the Quran, is clear verses, فِي صُدُورِ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْعِلْمِ, in the chests of those who were given knowledge, referring to the Quran being memorized, stored in people's hearts, memorized by heart. That's where it's stored, in their chests, meaning it was memorized by heart, and that is how it was learned and passed down. That is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserved the Quran. Now coming to manuscripts, so a manuscript is any of those early times when some parts of the Quran, some verses were written down, or after that time. There's a lot of manuscripts out there, and manuscripts are very important and beautiful in our deen, and you'll notice that old books also have manuscripts. Before the printing press and all the methods of printing and writing developed, how books used to be written by hand and copied by hand. So there's manuscripts for different Islamic classical books of past scholars and of the Quran, and it shows us the beauty of it, how the Arabic script was, and the beauty of that. Also shares there's a lot of benefits in the Muslims paying attention to the manuscripts, these makhtutat, these manuscripts of the Quran and of the other books of the deen. Now these manuscripts also show the care of Muslims in writing down the Quran. These manuscripts of the Quran show how much care the Muslims took when writing down the Quran throughout history. There are thousands of manuscripts out there, if not more. Some are in different museums, some might have been lost, some might have might still be out there somewhere undiscovered, amongst so many different manuscripts from the past. And some are from earlier, during time maybe of some of the companions. Some might be from later times. The point is, there's a lot of manuscripts out there, and manuscripts have benefit, even though that's not how the Quran was preserved. It was preserved orally through so many people learning it in each generation and passing it down. But manuscripts has some benefit in them, and it's important for us to preserve them and benefit from their preservation. even though it's important to note, that's not what we mean by when we say the Quran was preserved. That's not what we mean by when we say the Quran was preserved. And we'll talk about that in a minute as well, inshallah. So let's talk about these manuscripts, which this professor, Dan Brubaker, wrote this book, Corrections in Early Quran Manuscripts, 20 examples. These manuscripts which show corrections. So I haven't read the book, but I did some research on it, watched a few videos, of the author, so basically these manuscripts that he's claiming, these 20 examples of corrections in early Quran manuscripts, these are early manuscripts from, the time of the companions or later on or so, and they have corrections, a word that was wiped out here and something, it was corrected, the correct word was written on top of it, a word was missing, it was added, so things of that nature, corrections in these manuscripts. So these 20 examples, he's saying there's 20 different manuscripts that he is presenting as examples in that book that show, and these manuscripts might have a few verses, maybe a few surahs, some verses written on them. So it's not of the whole Quran, it's not a manuscript of the whole Quran, but rather, a few verses here and there. Each manuscript might have some verses, and they show corrections in those manuscripts. And so this is the doubt that they're bringing up, that the Quran is changed. Look, these are examples of manuscripts, of early manuscripts, how some corrections were made in them, in these Quran manuscripts. So first, let's talk about who's bringing up this doubt, who's trying to propagate this and why. So if you look online, you find two guys on their YouTube channel trying to propagate that. One of them claimed to be an ex-Muslim who became a Christian, so we see off the bat, what he might be coming from, what hidden agenda he might be trying to present. But part of it might seem to be that he's insecure, or both of them are insecure, so they want to put doubts. They're insecure maybe about their faith, so they're trying to put doubt in the faith of Muslims, that hey, it's not just our faith. Look, even your Quran wasn't preserved. Here are some examples of how it was changed. In reality, these aren't examples of any change in the Quran. So we'll discuss that inshallah in a bit. So all their claim that the Quran was changed is based on manuscripts of some parts of the Quran, some verses where a few words were wiped out, rewritten, some words were corrected. So they make it sound like this is a new discovery. They discovered something new. This is some sort of evidence that shows that the Quran is changed. Before we talk about that in more depth, I'm going to present an example from our own books of hadith, from Sahih Muslim, for example, a story that shows a correction in a document that was written during the time of Prophet Muhammad. As we know, when the Prophet did a treaty in Sulh Hudaybiyah, when he did a treaty with the Mushrikeen on the day of Al-Hudaybiyah, he wrote, when he was writing, this is what, Muhammad, Rasulullah, has agreed to, or agreed